has to offer. We are the National Association. We represent the American wine industry here in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. Our members are from all over the country. Currently, we represent 42, 43 states. That usually fluctuates between somewhere in the mid 40s. We have yet to hit all 50, but that is always a goal. All right. And we've been around since the late 70s, but have really expanded our reach in the last 10 years or so since Micheal and I have taken over our work here. Let's go to the next slide. Our president is Jim Treesize, who's formerly the head of the New York Wine and Grape Foundation. And then Micheal and I hold down the fort here in DC. Our membership is 100% dues-based. Our primary membership is our wineries. We also offer supplier memberships as well as memberships for associations, where associations get to have the opportunity to share information and coordinate on a higher organizational level. Thank you to all of our members here in Idaho who have been supporters of WineAmerica. Special shout out to Bittner Vineyards, who I think has been a member since we were formed. All right, and the next slide, I will hand it over to Micheal to kick off on to our political landscape that we've been working on.
Thanks. And I just want to note it's hard to believe it's been 10 years since we held our November board meeting in Boise, which was the last time that I was actually out in Idaho, but I know Tara's been there, I think twice since we were out there. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the work of the last year and what we're looking at for the next few months and this year in Congress. A lot of stuff did really happen in the last 12 months. Obviously, as you see in the last bullet point there, a lot of it has been related to the COVID-19 pandemic, which, is the reason why we are not with you in Boise right now. So, let's talk a little bit about the changing landscape in DC. Obviously last year was an election year. We had a change in administration, and whenever there's a new administration, there is just wholesale turnover with every agency in the federal government, including all the ones that we are primarily focused on with our work, which was the Department of Ag, Treasury Department, Food and FDA, EPA, United States Trade Representative. Now, the funny thing about TTB, which, as you all know, is our regulator, is they are primarily made up of career staffers. So a lot of the staff at TTB has been there for quite a long time, going back to the Bush and even Clinton administration. So, the good news for us is that there isn't a lot of turnover in that agency, which means that there isn't, a new learning curve with new staff. Obviously, with the new administration, that changes all the issues that we work on. Wine is essentially a nonpartisan issue. So, we work equally with both sides of the aisle, and we're lucky that, we're pretty much universally liked by both parties. But, we've had a changeover. The House of Representatives stayed the same. So the Democrats are still in control of the House. They do have a smaller majority, but they will be able to control the agenda there. And the Democrats have now taken control of the Senate, although it is a 50-50 tie with Vice President Harris now creating the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, which means that the Democrats do hold the majority. I'll talk a little bit about how that impacts policy in a few minutes. And then obviously, the Supreme Court is still, there's a skew towards the conservative end of things in the Supreme Court. And then most of the governorships remain in Republican control here in the US. So, the biggest change obviously is the Senate becoming Democrat and the new Democrat administration, which is a wholesale change from what we did have. And obviously, the year, outside of the election, the year has been dominated by COVID and how industries have had to adapt, including ours, which we'll talk a little bit more. Next slide, please. Okay, so 2020 was actually a really important year for the wine industry and for WineAmerica. Mainly, our singular achievement last year was the permanence of the Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act. And what that was is it basically is a tax credit for all wineries. It reformed a few other issues as well with tax collection. It was a cross it was across all the commodities. So beer, wine, spirits, cider, mead, everybody has a tax cut. I'll be talking a little bit about the specifics of that, but that was our key accomplishment from last year, to be able to make those tax credits permanent. That when the year started last year, right around this time last year, that was our singular focus. And then, in the middle of March, everything shut down, and we had to kind of pivot to working on COVID relief work, which included the CARES Act, which was the massive bill that passed in March, which included the Paycheck Protection Program, which has since been reauthorized a few times. That has been hugely helpful for wineries and other small businesses to keep their employees paid and to keep the lights on. Economic injury disaster loans, which also is a program that was within the CARES Act that has helped the industry. The first few months of last year, we were able to make sure that wineries could defer their excise tax payments to keep a little extra tax or extra money on hand, I should say. And then a couple other regulatory issues that were really big accomplishments for us were to open up the standards of fill regulations for TTB. So now certain container sizes can be used for wine. And also dietary guidelines from the USDA and the Health and Human Services Department has been the same. And I'll talk a little bit about a little more about those in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned, the Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act is probably WineAmerica's singular achievement over the last 10 years. A lot of times what we do in DC is we're reacting to legislation, trying to prevent something from happening or making sure things stay the same. And in this case, it was a proactive work on our part that goes back to 2015, when this bill was first introduced by Senator Ron Wyden in Oregon on the Democrat side, and on the Republican side, Roy Blunt from Missouri. And I can't stress enough, it's probably the most significant legislative achievement for the beverage alcohol industry of the last 20 years, and has led to savings of wineries, savings and tax savings for wineries of all sizes. But it was a long time coming. In 2017, we were able to get a 2-year version of it passed in the big tax bill that was passed at the end of that year. But that was set to expire at the end of 19. And then in 19, we were able to get a 1-year extension. So again, it was set to expire December 31st of last year. And as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, which was the large bill that Congress passed that included more COVID relief and had the appropriations bills in it last year, we were able to have our bill be put in there, and all of the tax credits are made permanent. So let's talk about what is actually in the bill. Next slide, please. So here are the basics of what's in the bill. So every winery, as you all know, has to pay federal excise taxes. For table wine, that base tax rate is $1.07. So for your first 30,000 gallons produced or removed in bond, you get $1 credit. So effectively, and that I think would be virtually everybody who's attending this conference would just be in maybe that one first category where you get $1 credit. So effectively, you're on table wine, you're paying a 7-cent credit on the $1.07 tax rate. Then for the next 100,000 gallons, from 30,000 to 130,000, it's 17 cents, which would be a 90-cent or 17-cent tax rate, which is a 90-cent credit. That was, if you remember, what the small producer tax credit was back before this bill passed. And then for 130,000 to 750,000 gallons, which I don't know might be one or two of the Idaho wineries, you get a 53.5-cent credit, which is a half of $1.07. So those rates there are based on table wine, but the credits can be taken on any type of wine. So for the first time, you're able to take tax credits on sparkling wine, which is prohibitively the tax is prohibitively expensive. It's $3.47 for naturally sparkling wine. So you're able to use that for the first time on on sparkling wine. Also, you could use it on dessert wine. So it is it is really beneficial for wineries, particularly in the smaller size, to be paying less taxes. Also, another thing that is hugely beneficial in the bill for tax purposes, the table wine percentage is now 16%. So if you're making red wines that are over 14%, you don't have to worry about paying the higher tax rate. And like I said, you can apply the tax credits for any type of wine, just as long as you're not double dipping, if you will, into your production. So you couldn't take the credits on 30,000, the dollar credit on 30,000 of sparkling wine and 30,000 of still wine. It's one or the other. Okay, next slide. All right, so as I said, craft beverage was our main achievement last year, but we had to pivot early in the year to COVID-19 relief. And, it was obviously something that we did not expect, nor did anybody expect. But once everything shut down last March, we got to work right away with our friends in the beer and spirits industries and our partners in the Wine Institute, who represent California wineries. We got to work right away on making sure that we could get some relief for the industry. And included in that was the CARES Act, which was the large bill that Congress passed in March of last year, which developed the Paycheck Protection Program. And what that is, which I'm sure many of you know, because a lot of you probably applied for it and received loans, is that was, those are government loans from the Small Business Administration that that are intended to make sure that your businesses can keep paying your employees and to pay for certain utilities. And that has since been reauthorized a few times, including at the end of last year in the big bill that passed at the end of last year that also included the tax credits. Economic injury disaster loans were built, or EIDL loans were loans that were already in place with the Small Business Administration. But again, the CARES Act included a $10,000 grant that you would not have to pay back if you were to get one of those loans. And again, I mentioned earlier that for the first 6 months of last year, we were able to suspend the excise tax collection at the federal level, which allowed wineries to keep that extra cash that they would have had to pay on taxes on hand to just maintain operations. And that is really what a lot of the stuff early in the year and early in the COVID crisis is what we really worked on, which is to make sure that wineries can stay in business and they can keep the lights on and pay their employees. And, since because of the pandemic, wineries had to adapt and go to virtual tastings, if you will, or start curbside pickup. And in some states, they allow local delivery now. So, and then the direct to consumer obviously is really important for us, the ability to ship. So we wanted to make sure that any federal aid allowed these wineries to, if they were pivoting in their business models, to be able to keep the lights on, if you will. And then obviously on our lobbying related to the Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act, we used COVID to our advantage, if you will, for that lobbying, because the last thing that wineries needed at the end of last year was to see their federal taxes go up. Next slide, please. It suggested that maybe we should get rid of the all standards of fill for wine, which means that you would be able to put your wine in any container size. And then the other thing is that if we're not going to eliminate all standards of fill, let's open up some new ones. So WineAmerica submitted comments on the proposal. We were not in favor of eliminating all standards of fill. And the reason being is that if we eliminate all standards of fill, what would be each state could come up with their own, what would stop a state from, say, Utah, of saying you can only have wine in 750 milliliter bottles, and that would create a whole host of problems because of the state control of alcohol regulation. But what we did suggest is allowing for new standards to be put into existing standards of fill. And the three that were included were the three that are listed here: 200 milliliters, 250 milliliters, and 355 milliliters. And primarily, those are all can sizes. If you are canning any wine prior to the end of last year, you could only sell it individually in a 375 milliliter can or a 187 milliliter can. And 375 is a different size than 12 ounces. It's 12.7 ounces. So the availability of cans in that size, in the 375 size, was not as widely available as the 12-ounce can, which is the 355 milliliter size. And a lot of wineries wanted the ability to use the more inexpensive and more widely available can. In the case of the of 250 milliliters, if you have seen a lot of wine in cans, you see that that is a common size. But prior to the end of last year, again, you had to sell those in an approved size, which means either a 2-pack of 500 milliliters or a 4-pack of 1 liter. And where that kind of gave certain retailers an advantage is that they were able to sell those cans individually, such as at a Whole Foods or a place like that, whereas the winery could only sell them in the 4-packs. And then 200 milliliters is a size that is commonly used for ice wine, actually. So those are the three new sizes that allow wineries to have more availability when it comes to canning their products, which we're seeing more and more of. And then the other thing, which is every 5 years, the USDA, the Department of the Food and Drug Administration, and the Department of Health and Human Services are required by law to come up with dietary guidelines for Americans. And that happens every 5 years, and it was up for renewal last year to go through 2025. And for the last 30 years, for alcoholic beverages, it was recommended that an adult man could have 2 alcoholic beverages a day. An adult woman could have 1 alcoholic beverage a day and be within the recommended dietary guidelines. And then that's considered, for our case, that's a 5-ounce glass of wine. Earlier on last year, they were proposing to bring that down to 1 drink for both men and women. And we believed that it should remain the same as it's been for the last 30 years. So we petitioned for that, and we found out at the end of last year that they did keep it the same. So again, we're for recommended dietary guidelines. The U.S. government recommends or says that a adult man can have 2 drinks a day, and adult woman can have 1 drink a day. So we were happy to be able to have that maintained and not have kind of these neo-prohibitionist groups who pushed against that to have the government revise that when it's been the same for the last 30 years. Obviously, when you talk about alcohol and health, it's always a sticky situation. But we believe that this was encouraged moderate consumption, which WineAmerica has always been a proponent of. Okay, next slide. All right. So, new year, new administration, new issues, but actually, are they new? Not really. So, we're still focused on COVID relief, as that's really important for the industry. Right now, the Congress and the administration are working on what's the American Rescue Act, which is the $1.9 trillion proposal that the Biden administration has put out and that Congress is currently working on. It would include more Paycheck Protection Program loans, more funding for Small Business Administration loans. So the sticky situation with that is that in the Senate, you only have the 50-50 tie with the vice president able to break the tie. Because of that, if any large ticket piece of legislation needs 60 votes normally in the Senate to go forward. In the case of the American Rescue Act, the Democrats in the Senate are using a process known as budget reconciliation, which allows for a simple majority to pass the legislation. And this has been used in the past by both parties. It was used for the Affordable Care Act in 2010. It was used by the Obama administration back then in Congress. It was used by the Republican-controlled Congress and the Trump administration in 2017 for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So it is something that's been used in the past. but whenever a large piece of legislation has budgetary impacts, they are allowed to use it. And in this case, they're using it for the Recovery Act, which means that when they hope to have it done the middle of next month, it'll only take a simple majority in the Senate to pass. But there are some vital pieces of legislation in that, or pieces of reform and things that we will need for the industry in that bill. The first piece that we are really looking at is a piece of legislation called the Restaurants Act. The Restaurants Act was a bill that was introduced last year originally, and what it does is it creates a grant program for restaurants and drinking establishments. And WineAmerica worked with its congressional sponsors to make sure that include winery tasting rooms. So it's the large standalone bill, which was reintroduced about 2 weeks ago, that now has over 100 sponsors in the House and about 10 sponsors in the Senate. It's bipartisan. What it does is it creates a $120 billion stabilization fund for restaurants and drinking establishments, which again includes places like brewery tap rooms and winery tasting rooms. If you are a tasting room and you are part of a group of 20 or less locations, which is virtually every tasting room in the United States, you are allowed to apply for the grant. Now, again, it's $120 billion in a standalone version of the bill. There is a $25 billion version of it that's in the American Rescue Act. And currently, WineAmerica is working to make sure that it's twofold, working to make sure that stays in the final bill, and also working on the standalone bill itself. We're looking at it as two different things. So that's would be beneficial for the industry. Another piece of legislation we're looking at is called the Fairness for Craft Beverage Producers Act. And that kind of handles a bit of an obscure tax issue related to the recovery bill at the end of last year. In the PPP program in last year allows for certain hospitality industries and businesses to get 3.5 times more of a PPP loan than certain other businesses. That's because hospitality has been hit the hardest by COVID. But because of a obscure kind of tax rule, you have to have a certain code, if you will, to apply for the increased amount of the PPP loan. And unfortunately, wineries and beverage alcohol producers have a different tax classification than restaurants do. So because of that, beverage alcohol producers were not allowed to apply for the extra money. And what they the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress are really intent to pass immigration reform. And what with that, they earlier last week they just introduced a large bill that would basically be the first large piece of immigration reform that would pass Congress in probably 30 years. WineAmerica is certainly invested in agricultural labor and agricultural labor reform. We would like to see a large-scale reform bill passed, but we'd like to have it be bipartisan. We're primarily focused on agriculture issues such as the H-2A program. So, we're really looking at that bill. It's just been introduced again with the tie in the Senate. It's unclear how they could get that through, whether they will try to do a reconciliation process with that or not later this year. But it is something that we're watching. We're actually hoping to see some smaller bills introduced that would cover the agriculture labor issues of immigration reform. And then lastly on our plate right now is tariffs and international trade. In the last few years, there's been a lot of news about tariffs placed on wine, whether it's American wine being sent to China or EU wine being sent here to the US. And, our organization is fundamentally against all tariffs, whether it be retaliatory or not. And we think that the tariffs on the European wines, in particular, coming into the U.S., are particularly damaging because it has a impact on the entire supply chain of the wine industry here in the U.S. So we've worked with our beverage alcohol partners in the spirits and beer industries to first, back when there was the Trump administration, to encourage them to rethink their tariff policy. And now with the new administration, we're working on educating them to just show the impact that the EU tariffs have had on the American wine supply chain here in the U.S. And just real quick, these tariffs are related to a dispute with airplane manufacturers of Boeing and Airbus, unrelated to any to wine at all. And because wine is a value-added product, we're usually kind of caught in the crosshairs with these trade battles. And currently, there is a 25% tariff on most wine from the European Union being sent here to the U.S. We were lucky to not have retaliatory tariffs placed on us. But as an Idaho winery, you're wondering, I don't export. Why does this impact me? Well, it impacts the suppliers you use. It impacts your ability to get glasses or glass bottles and barrels. It impacts maybe the small importer retailer that also carries your wine. It has a wide-ranging impact across the entire industry. So we are working to make sure that we can maybe get some of those tariffs lifted. It's a heavy lift. But it is something that we've been working on for the last few years and really are stepping up a bit more our advocacy on this. Okay, I think that is it from me. I think we're going to turn it over to Tara to talk about music licensing.
I'll just quickly do an update, as most of you are familiar with this issue. We spent most of this year focused on the consent decrees that come out of the Department of Justice. They regulate ASCAP and BMI. Notably, the similarly situated provision is a key component that's important to wineries, as well as a number of other more nuanced items that we want to see preserved. The previous chair of the Antitrust Committee had gone through hundreds of consent decrees, undoing them, citing many of which probably should have gone, but citing the music licensing consent decree going back to the mid-40s, saying that it was outdated and didn't reflect the industry. We argued that it was the only protection that businesses have, particularly small businesses who can't rely on hiring lawyers and going through court cases to essentially achieve the rights that the consent decrees already provide. So we're happy to see that the decrees were preserved, along with the recommendation that future administration go back to review them. And that's something that we continue to educate lawmakers about, the importance of not only these consent decrees, but eventual long-term improvements in the music licensing world. So as we go forward with that education, we'll continue to emphasize the need for transparency and fairness within the music world, particularly with an eye to small business. If anyone has any questions, specific questions regarding the mechanics of music licensing, please feel free to reach out to me offline, and I'm always available to answer your questions. All right, I'll go on to the next slide. Great. So we hope you enjoyed our presentation today and hopefully learned a thing or two about what's facing our industry going into another year of the unknown. We hope you consider joining WineAmerica. Again, we are entirely funded by membership dues. We do not receive grants. We do not supplement with events. We are entirely focused on our work regarding policy and legislation. Membership starts at $500 a year. We are now also offering a monthly payment option which breaks down to roughly $27 a month. Please reach out to me with any questions. You could join online at our website, wineamerica.org/membership. But I can also help you directly over the phone or by email, tgood@wineamerica.org. So yeah, reach out to us anytime.
Yeah, I just to echo that, public policy is a hard sell for some people. I think it's really hard to explain how it really does affect their bottom line. But in the last year, I think people realize how important it is to be more engaged at the state and federal level and at the local level too. So, it's something that, we really value our members, and we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can for them and the industry as a whole. But we understand that public policy is not exactly the most exciting thing, and you're more concerned about how am I going to sell my wine. But I think in the last year, we've really seen how everything from DC to, your local township really does impact your business.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael and Tara. We'll give just a few moments for people to ask any questions if they have any. Give a few more minutes of awkward silence.
I know
we look forward to coming out to Idaho again at some point when this is all over.
Yes, we would love to have you.
And there was a lot of information. I know I kind of went through relatively quickly because I wanted to make sure to get everything in. But yeah, I mean, and I, there's Tara's contact right there if you have questions, or about anything, please let us know. But yeah, we're here for the industry.
Well, it looks like one question just came in from Coco and Carl up in northern Idaho. Are there any plans to work on talking with individual states to make their DTC laws simplified?
Well, that is a very good question. WineAmerica is a federal public policy organization. We simply don't have the bandwidth to work at the state level. However, we do have, as Tara mentioned, the State Association, Regional Association Advisory Council, which Moya participates in and is the vice chair of it. And the states are able to share ideas with each other, talk about what's happening. I will say we are looking at the possibility of USPS shipping and whether or not that's viable for the industry and whether or not we can get something passed in Congress to have that happen. But to answer your question, no, we're not working at the state level. We certainly understand that in the last year, in particular, DTC laws are quite complicated, but we just simply don't have the bandwidth to do that. We can certainly offer advice to a state when they're looking to change their DTC laws, though.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to update us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Attendees, let's go ahead and take another quick 10-minute break this time. And we'll start a little early with the next presentation and get you guys out of here a little bit early. So we'll be back here at 10:35 to start the next presentation.